Testing 1, 2. It's live! And we're live! Every week, we're live. Hi, I'm Tim Van Milligan. This is RockSim Live, where we talk about the RockSim software, how to design rockets, how to use the Launch Visualizer and RockSim Pro. We meet every week here on Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, which is 4 p.m. on the East Coast. We have some visitors already in the house. We have Jim Walker, and we have David O'Brien, Alfred Indy, Stirk03, and Hugo BG06. And some others that haven't said hello yet. So if you're here watching, go ahead and say hello where you're from. We appreciate it. We want to know, sometimes we have a worldwide audience, so this is cool. If you have a question about RockSim, go ahead and ask it now. The show is about what you want to talk about, so I don't have any agenda except for helping you to be successful with rocketry. I've got a monitor over here where I'm monitoring the chat. My arm right here, I got tennis elbow, and this prevents me from bending my arm down, which stretches that tendon there that causes tennis elbow. That's why I'm wearing that. It's been acting up again. Every time I do curls with weights, it starts acting up. So I'm looking for new exercises to do my biceps without doing curls. Hugo B6 or BG06 is from France, so we do have an international audience. So it's got to be like 10 p.m. in France right now. So thanks for watching. We have Maximo Delgado, Chris's Rocketry and More from Golden Valley, Arizona. And we have our first question. We have Stirk03 says, trying to put a BT20 body tube into a BT60 tube. The BT20 is to be the engine tube, but I'm having trouble getting it displayed properly. It's going in front or behind the BT60 tube. Okay, I can answer that question. Okay, so let me get my screen here. So here is, what am I running here? I'm in RockSim Pro. Let me get RockSim up here. So here's RockSim. I got both of them running. They're both very similar, especially in designing rockets. The only time they're different is when they're doing simulations. So let's open a design here. Zephyr Jr. I happen to have the Zephyr Jr. sitting right here, so let's open it up. Okay, so Stirk03. So here's what he wants to do. He's got a tube, and his is BT60, and he wants to put a BT20 tube, which is 18 millimeters, inside of it. And what he's saying is that when he tries to add it, it either puts it behind the tube or in front of the tube. And so that's an easy problem to fix. Okay, so first what you have to do is you got to come up here and you got to highlight the tube. So right now I'm highlighting the aft body tube. So that's your larger tube, that's your BT60. And you want to put the tube inside. So you have to use a special component called an inside tube. And you'll find it over here in the Add New Components list. It's the top one right in the middle. It says inside tube. What you're clicking on is you're clicking on body tube. So the difference between an inside tube and a body tube is the body tube is on the outside rocket, and it's a special tube because it has aerodynamic characteristics, where an inside tube, since the air never touches it as it's flowing through the air, we had to separate them. So we have two tubes. We have an inside tube and we have a body tube. And so you're clicking on the body tube. And if I click on the body tube, you'll see what happens. 18 millimeter. Click OK. It does add it to the outside of the tube. And that's not what we want. We want it on the inside. So I'm going to click cancel on this one. Save my changes? No. So then it should have gone away. It crashed. It didn't like that. Well, let's try it again. Alright, so what I did was open Zephyr Jr. Okay, so we're back to where we were. You go to the rocket design components, you select this tube, because that's the tube you're putting it inside, and you can either select it here or you can select it from the list. A lot of people, when they're designing a rocket, they just use the default names. And the default name on a tube is body tube. And so sometimes if you're looking through the list, it can be hard to find things. Like here we have 2 aft centering rings. They're named the same, but as you see when I click on them, they change position down here. So this one right here is really the forward centering ring. So anyway, so body tube, inside, wrong body tube, that's a motor tube. See, that's a body tube and that's a body tube. You can't tell them apart unless you change the name. So I'm going to click on aft body tube, hit inside tube, and it's looking in a database, and I'll select an 18, click OK, and let me make this screen bigger here so you can see it. Okay, so now this blue tube right here is inside the big tube. And what you would probably do is change the name, so we'll call it engine mount body tube. I'm just typing that in so that when you look in the parts list, you can tell it apart. So like I got an engine mount body tube, and I got that body tube, and I have an aft body tube. So that should answer your questions, Stirk 03. It's just a matter of clicking on the right button. And that's what we're here for, is just kind of straighten those things out. We have Maximo Delgado. I think I said his name already. And he says, hey, Carlos K. He's from Marietta, Georgia. It's 73 degrees in Marietta, Georgia right now. And I am so jealous. It's not even 30 degrees here right now, so it's still cold. It's supposed to warm up this weekend, but we had another snowstorm this week. So we had one last week and then one this week, and it's been cold, except for the weekends. The weekends have been nice. So it snows during the week, it all melts off on the weekend, and then it snows in the week again. So Rick DeFoss is from New Hampshire. He says, greetings all. And that's all the messages I've got. So if you have a question on how to use RockSim or RockSim Pro or the Launch Visualizer, go ahead and ask. That's what I'm here to answer. Let me open up while we're waiting for questions to come in. Let's go to the Apogee website. So the ApogeeRockets.com, that's our website. And when you get there, this is what it's going to look like. We're doing RockSim Live right now, so if you kind of scroll down right here is where we're doing RockSim Live training. And if you click on the photo here, it will take you to our archive page where we archive each episode. So we're on episode number 109 today, and last week we talked about using a mass override. We talked about CG. We talk a lot about the center of gravity, center of pressure, specifically the mass override, how to make your rocket as accurate as possible. So that's where the archive is. And if you're brand new to RockSim and you'd like to try it, there's a free 30-day demo. And if you click on How to and Guides, and then you come down here to Software, click on Software. Then you'll see RockSim 10 free trial. So if you click on that, this is where you would download a free trial version. You give your name, your email. We'd like to know where you're from, because like I was doing before, I'd like to find out where everybody's from. And then how'd you hear about us? You know, maybe you'd say RockSim Live. I'd love to see that. Nobody yet has done that. So, and then there's a little video there. Also, if you go to How-To and Guides, go to Software. This right here, this column is the RockSim How-To information. So if you're just starting with RockSim, if you're brand new, I recommend going to the RockSim video tutorials. Also in this column we have RockSim Pro video tutorials because it's a little bit different, but not much. We have the RockSim Live training, which I just showed you. And then some other frequently asked questions like version history, system requirements, frequently asked questions. But if you're just starting, start with the RockSim video tutorial. Just click on it here. And you know, video number 1 is getting started by opening an existing design. So if you're just starting out and you just want to play around and see what it can do, start here. You know, it's a short YouTube video. It'll walk you through how do you open a design, how do you click the launch button, because that's what we're here for, is to launch rockets. So those are the 2 things you have to learn like real quick: how to open a design, how to launch it. And that's what that's for. Oh, we have Johan, the sloper. He's from the Netherlands checking in. So now we got 2 Europeans. We have Frankie Russo TV. Frank from Brooklyn, New York City. Awesome. He is interested in rocket propulsion. So, Frankie, what's your question? That's what we're here for. Johan says he's getting an echo. I hope that's not me. Is anybody else getting an echo? It makes him nuts. Jeff Gortowski says yes, he's getting an echo too. Why are we getting an echo? Let me see here. Let me see. We got 2 microphones. I don't know if I can turn it off. Let's see if I can turn it off. There's no checkbox to turn it off. Desktop audio. We have 2 microphones. Let me try this one. Okay, so I turned off the volume on the front camera. Did that help? And this is going to take like 30 seconds for that to go out to the world and then come back to me. So hopefully that helped. I turned off one of the microphones. I didn't realize there was 2 turned on. Frankie asks, how do I learn about rocket propulsion from RockSim? Okay, rocket propulsion is a very broad topic, Frankie. So everybody says, yeah, that's it. Cool. So we got the sound figured out. Cool. So rocket propulsion. So let me take this engine tube out that we just put in. So that we can run some simulations. I'm going to delete that right there. I'm going to say yes, delete it. Okay, so now we're back to our original rocket. So this is the rocket that I have here in my hands, and you can't see it very well unless I switch screens. Let me switch screens and you can see it better. Okay, so here's the Zephyr Jr. Let me turn it around this way so you can read the name, Zephyr Jr. Let's go back here. This is the RockSim file for it. If you wanted to follow along as we're doing this, let me show you where you could download it. This is a relatively new rocket, so it might not be in the demo version that you download, but you'll find it here on the website. So you just go to the Apogee website, apogeerockets.com, and then the search bar right up here, just type in Zephyr, YR, and we want the Junior because there's 2 versions, a Zephyr and a Zephyr Junior. This one's 4 inches in diameter, this one is 2.2. Okay, so that's the Zephyr Junior, and you just scroll down on the page a little bit to this menu bar right here, and you just click on RockSim file, and then it jumps way down to the bottom of the page, and here is where you can download it. You just click on the link, and it will download it and put it into your downloads. So then you can open it up from right there. Okay, so that's how you download it. So I've opened it up, and now we're going to run a simulation because this is where rocket propulsion comes in. So to run a simulation, come up here to the top, and there's this button right here, and if you hover over it, it says prepare for launch, because this is where we're going to load rocket motors in. Okay, so I click on that, and then I will open up this screen right here, and this is where we're going to put the rocket motor. So we're looking at the back end of the rocket right here, and I'm trying to make this bigger. There's the back end of the rocket. Here's the motor tube. And right down here it lists, RockSim has already figured out which size engines to use that it wants to use. It wants to use a 24 millimeter. So you can just come down here to choose engine, or you can just double click in the line. And when you do that, it brings up a list of rocket engines. And so this is where we're getting into rocket propulsion. These are all the ones that are in the database, and you can see the diameter filter up here says show only engines that match the diameter. So on this rocket, it's a 24 millimeter diameter, which is about 1 inch big, and this shows all the 24 millimeter diameter motors. And then we're just going to pick one, and then we're going to do some experiments. So what we're going to do when we learn about propulsion is we're going to compare. So the first time I'm going to just choose a small engine. So right now, if you know anything about model rockets, the way they're coded, the engine code always starts out with a letter, and then there's a number after it. So the letter is kind of like how big the gas tank is. And when you go from one letter to the next, so if I go from a D to an E, it doubles in size, and that's actually measured. The measurement for that is called Newton seconds, and it's the total impulse. So here's a D9, which has 18 Newton seconds of power, and if I go down to an E engine, here's 39. So that's almost, that's actually a little bit more than double. That's because this D9 is a little bit on the small size. A full D engine, if the gas tank was completely full, the total impulse would be 20. So this one's a little bit empty. This one's a little bit more full. This one's a little empty again. And then an E engine, if it had a full gas tank, it should be double of 20. So it should be 40. So this E is not even close to 40. This one is pretty close. So this E15, that's like a full tank of gas. And so, just like in your car, the more gas you have, the further you can go. So you can double the altitude by doubling, just going from a D to an E engine. And then the letter after it is the average thrust of the rocket motor in newtons. So this says D9, and if I come over here to this column right here that says average thrust in newtons, 9.9. So 9 and 9. Makes sense, right? Here's an E11, so you have an 11 here and an 11 way over here. Normally, when you go to the store or when you're on the internet to buy engines, you don't see these columns. All you see is this right here. So to tell these engines apart, an E11 versus an E15, you look at that number there. And so what does that number mean? The average thrust. So I like to tell people it's kind of like how hard you push down on the accelerator pedal of your gas tank or on your car. The harder you push it down, what's going to happen? You're going to go fast. And if you just push it down a little bit, you go slow. So if you want to go fast, you want a big number. If you want to go slow, you want a small number. And why would you want to go fast versus slow? Well, this is where rocket propulsion comes in again. What it comes down to is, just like in your car, if you're slamming on the gas pedal, what's your mileage going to be like? How many miles per gallon are you going to get? If you really push down hard, your tank of gas is not going to go as far. And that's similar in rocketry. If you push down hard, you're going to go fast, but you're not going to go quite as high. for the same amount of gas. So that's kind of like the explanation of why you might pick one motor over another one. So let's run a quick simulation here with a D9. Let's try a D15, because then I can go to an E15, and then it's a direct comparison or a better comparison. So I'm going to select the motor. You can see now it's loaded it in the back. We do have to select an ejection delay. So this is usually when you buy an engine, there'll be the letter, then the number, and then a dash, and then another number. This one has a T in it, and the T tells us what kind of propellant is in the rocket motor. And I wouldn't worry about the kind of propellant, because it's more for visual effect. This one has T, which stands for Blue Thunder, so that means it has a blue flame. Sometimes what rocket motors will have a W, which means a white flame. So don't get carried away by the color, because the color doesn't affect the performance. It's just for visual effect. But you want to look at the number after that. And right now we're going to choose a 7-second delay. So this motor, if you were to buy it from Apogee, it would be a D15-7. And that's, if you gave us that code, we know exactly what you mean. And then we're gonna launch it. And so I'm just going to quickly look here. We're going to eject the parachute at the maximum ejection delay. And that maximum ejection delay was 7 seconds. So 7 seconds after the motor burns all of its propellant, after all the propellant is gone. This is not measured from liftoff. It's measured from when the propellant is gone. Then we're going to pop out the parachute. And our starting state is, we got a 36-inch launch rod. Let's make that a little bit longer. I'm going to make it 5 feet, 60 inches. And let's launch it straight up. So the launch angle is 0 degrees. So it's going to be launched straight up. Our launch conditions, we're at about 700 feet above sea level. And we have an 8-mile-an-hour wind. Okay, so let's launch this and see what happens. Okay, so here we have an animation of what is going to happen. And right down my image, I lost the trees. This is just an image. It doesn't really depict anything except for a nice day. So right here is the rocket sitting on the pad. And these black lines here are what we call the weathercocking lines. We want the rocket to stay in that cone, because that's kind of safe. You know, if the rocket's going more straight up than sideways, that's what we want to see. And then I can run the simulation and the animation by clicking this button here, start the playback. So when I click that, you can see it, the rocket's taking off. This is smoke coming out of the rocket, and the rocket is coasting upwards, and then 7 seconds after the motor burned out, the parachute popped out. And so now it's coming down. And I'm gonna pause it here, and I'm going to drag the slider back, and I'm going to go back in time, so to about the peak altitude right here. And it tells me my peak altitude down here, and then where the rocket is on the range. It says it's minus 78 feet, which is it's 78 feet upwind. Okay, so we got our first launch. So when I click cancel, it'll take me back to the home screen, and this is our summary screen. And so the last simulation is highlighted. So we had the D15. It went 681 feet up in the air. It was a pretty good flight, I would say. So now let's do some rocket propulsion. Let's say what happens if I double the power. So I'll go from a D to an E. So I'm going to go prepare for launch, choose engine, and this time it doesn't matter which engine you pick, because it doesn't cost us anything to run simulations. So you could run any of them. And there's a whole bunch you could run. But I'm going to run the E15s because it's double the power of the D15. And it has pretty close, the average thrust is about the same. So it's just going to, so how do you double the power? Well, basically you double the burn time. So here we had a burn time of 1.4 seconds on the D15. This one is 2.6. So we double 1.4, which would be 2.8, and this was 2.64. So it's not quite exactly double the burn time, but it's pretty close. So now it has a longer burn, and so what happens? So let's click OK. It's still going to be a 7-second delay, and I'm just going to do flight profile. Just going to launch it. So everything else stayed the same, and then when we launch it, the image looks the same, but look at the altitude here. So see the altitude, how high it's going now? It's still going up. It just peaked altitude right here, and now it's starting to come down. Let's pause it and back up in time a little bit. And this is approximately peak altitude of 1539 feet. And its range is 260 feet, 286 feet upwind. And I click cancel, it goes to the main page, and now we can compare the D15 to the E15. And you can see our maximum altitude was 681, which is about, rounded up to 700 feet. And this one is 1542 feet. So it's not quite double the altitude, but in the ballpark. And so that's, when we said we go from a D engine to an E engine, we're going to double the power, and you get approximately double the altitude. So this is all rocket science and rocket propulsion. So I hope, Frank, that kind of answers some of your questions, because I know there's going to be a lot more questions about rocket propulsion. So hopefully that helped. Okay, let's go back to our chat over here and see what we have, because there's a lot of chats going on. Frankie asks, are there books and tutorials? Well, yes, there is books and tutorials. The tutorials I kind of already showed you. So if you're go to the Apogee website, and the tutorials are about how to use RockSim. So you go to How To and Guides, you go down to Software, and then you go to Video Tutorials right there, and that gives you tutorials. Now if you want books, I do have a book on rocket propulsion. So if you go to Shop, come down here to Rocket Books and Videos. It's either a book or a pamphlet. Let's try pamphlets. And it's called Model Rocket Propulsion, and I'm looking through it. What the best thing to do is just search for it. So you just do, here's the book, Model Rocket Propulsion. You start typing it in. I could see it there. Come on. I gotta type the whole thing in. There it is, Model Rocket Propulsion. Written by me. I wrote this, wow, this was in the 1990s I wrote this book. It's still good because the laws of physics haven't changed. Thank goodness. So that's we'll give you a kind of like what I just talked about here, about how the rocket motors are classified and how you would pick a rocket motor based on the name. So if you want it to go higher, you just pick the next letter up. That's pretty easy to do. Jeffrey Gortowski says, I have seen at least 2 people do their level 1 with a full-size Zephyr and 1 level 2 on a Katana. That's great, because we designed the level, or the Zephyr, the big 4-inch, for level 1. We tried to make it as easy as possible. Let me show you some pictures here on how big the Zephyr is. This one is a lot bigger. It's 4 inches in diameter. You can see it uses big engines. This is a white propellant. You can see it's a big white flame. This one is, I think, a Cicerone Classic propellant. It's a smaller white flame, but it still goes just as high. Yeah, here's some pictures of the rocket on descent. Another launch photo. This is a different propellant type called a Smoky Sam or Blackjack. They're both create this big black smoke column. I mean, the smoke is so dense you can't even see the flame. So that hopefully answers that question. Okay, so Jim Walker says, I haven't done a level 1 yet, but I'm curious about it though. Well, good, Jim. Go ahead and go for it. It's a lot of fun. You know, with the advantage of doing level 1 is then you can buy the bigger motors, and then you can buy H's and I's, and then you can step up to a level 2, which is a J, K, and L. So if you want to fly big, you have to get certified because it's a safety thing. It's not that you're not worthy or anything like that. It's just that we want to make sure that you're trained, because the risks of flying bigger rocket motors are higher because you got more energy. You know, and a falling object, what would you rather fall on your head? You know, a feather or a golf ball? You know, you want something light, you know. So if you're going to go with something heavier, we want to make sure you're safe. Carlos K says, my biggest L1 question is, what electronics does Tim recommend using? There are so many choices. Okay, so what Carlos is talking about is, if you're on the Apogee website, if you go to shopping and you come down here to electronics and payloads, and then we've got so many devices here, and I got an image that's missing. Ah, that's strange. But we have altimeters and cameras and dual deployment and other accessories and locators and staging. Mostly what we're talking about when we're talking about big rockets is dual deployment altimeters. So if you click on that, here you can see how many dual deployment altimeters we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's a lot. Not all of these are true dual deployment. This is kind of pseudo dual deployment because it doesn't deploy, it just releases, which is a difference. Anyway, so which one would I use? And why do we carry so many? Basically, a lot of these do exactly the same thing. It's a dual deployment. So in dual deployment, what happens is, let me see if I got a picture. Okay, you just click on any altimeter, and if I scroll down far enough, if I keep going, where am I? I have nothing to show. Okay, let's do dual deployment with Rocket and RockSim. So we have dual deployment means 2 deployments. So you have to have 2 deployment devices. So this rocket only has 1 parachute. So let's quickly throw in another parachute. So aft body tube, I'm going to put in another parachute, and I want to put in a small one. So we'll do a 12-inch parachute. So it's 12 inches in diameter, which you see here. And right now the parachute is right here. I'm just going to slide it back a little bit so it's not into the shoulder. It's got a really thickness here, which is, I'm trying to figure out why it's so thick. Okay, hit that. See, now it's a lot smaller. All right, so we had a parachute in there. Let's change the color of this parachute so we can tell it apart. So the 2D, let's make it green or yellow. And in 3D, let's make it blue. Okay, so and then this other parachute, okay, I'm going to change the name on this one because the default is just parachute. So I'm going to change the name to 12-inch diameter parachute and click OK. So I can tell them apart. So I got this 12-inch parachute here, and then there should have been another one. You're right here is another parachute. Let's see what this one is. This one is a 32-inch parachute. That's a little bit big for this rocket, so I'm going to bump it down to 24, and I'm going to call it a 24-inch parachute. And it's also orange, so we got to change the color. We'll make it that color and that color so we can tell them apart. Okay, so in dual deployment, so we're going to run the simulation. So we have a motor already in there, and we're going to set it up. So nothing's changed here. We're still using E15-7. But under flight events, now it shows two parachutes. We have a 24-inch and a 12-inch. So now we're going to release the parachutes at different times, deploy the parachutes. So the first one we want to deploy at Apogee, and then the second one, since the altimeter controls it, we'll set an altitude. We can specify one. So I'm going to choose an altitude of, let's call it 300 feet. So we knew this rocket before went to about 1,500 feet. And so it's going to go that high again, and then it's going to come down, but when it gets to 300, we're going to release the main parachute. And the advantage of this, when I click on the flight profile, so here's the rocket, and when we launch it, the rocket takes off. When it gets to Apogee, it's going to release the small 12-inch parachute. So we're going to see a small parachute pop out here. There it is. But since it's small, it's coming down fast. And so it's coming down really fast. But then watch over here when we get to 300 feet. What's going to happen is we're going to deploy the big parachute. So right there, 300 feet, the big parachute came out, and the rocket is coming down. Notice that with the small parachute, it comes down at this angle, which is kind of fast. And then when the big one comes out, it slows it way down, and it starts drifting with the wind further. So if we had deployed that big parachute up here at that descent angle, it would probably land way out here. But with dual deployment, we can get the rocket to land closer to the pad. So that's the advantage of dual deployment, and you have to use an altimeter. And any one of those altimeters we can use, and what I clicked on was one of them that was called the Easy Mini. And if I go back up a level, we've got a lot of different altimeters, and they do basically the same thing. They deploy one parachute at Apogee and one parachute at a lower altitude. So which one should you use? The real question is, why do we carry so many? Because we have to carry so many because we sell altimeters like water. Everybody wants an altimeter, so we sell a lot of them. And our manufacturers just can't keep up to the pace that we sell altimeters. And so we run out of stock. And if we run out of stock, then the next person that wants to buy an altimeter doesn't have anything to choose from. So we have multiple altimeters that do basically the same thing. The reason is we have to have something in stock so that we can help out customers. So which one should you choose? Flip a coin, really. That's what I tell people, just flip a coin, because they're all good. They'll all work. If they weren't good altimeters, we wouldn't sell them. So the basic ones that we sell, these two here, the AIM USB and then the Easy Mini, those are pretty close to doing the same thing. This one is $121, this one's $101, but this one requires extra items that you have to buy, and so once you buy those extra items, they both come out to be about the same price. So it's not a price thing, it's more of, again, it's we have to have something in stock. And they both, ease of use, about the same. You know, they both work on basically the same principle. You got to plug in your wires, you got to tell it what altitude you want it to set at. Yeah, so the AIM dual deployer, this one does have an extra feature. It's a recording altimeter. So not only does it deploy the parachutes, it also records the altitude. And and you can download the data. This one, I think you only get peak altitude. I don't think you get altitude during the entire flight. Let me just double check. It does have downloadable data. Dual deployment. Doesn't have telemetry. Does have altitude. No acceleration, no gyros. Records flight duration. I think this is it is saving the data. Sample rate 100 on a cent. Yeah, so this is a recording altimeter as well, because it is sampling the data, storing it, about 10 minutes of data, and it has a maximum altitude of 100,000 feet, which nobody's going to go to. So yeah, so either the Easy Mini or the Enticore AIM dual deployment altimeter. And then these other altimeters that are on this page are more specialized. Like this Adrel, this is a single deployment, so it's not dual deployment. And then the advantage of this one, if you wanted it, is it's very tiny. This is the smallest one we have. I mean, this thing weighs under a gram. It's so small. And then we have the Lightning Bug dual deployment altimeter. And what this one is, it doesn't require low voltage igniters. In fact, you don't even need an igniter. It creates a plasma arc on its own, which is kind of cool. So that's that one. And then we get into dual deployment altimeters that have more features. So if you want a lot of features, the Telemetrum, they just released a new version, and we're expecting those in soon. And then the Telemega has even more features, but you pay for it in price. And then you have an Easy Mega, then the RR Sport dual deployment. This is another good dual deployment altimeter in the similar price range as the Easy Mini and the AIM. A lot of people like this one. But it can do additional things besides dual deployment. I believe you can also do staging, which with a dual deployment altimeter you can't do. Let me see, just see if there's any other ones here. Yeah, these aren't altimeters. These are just devices that go with altimeters. So hopefully, Carlos, that answers your question. Any one of them that Apogee sells is a good one. Flip a coin. Okay, so we got more stuff here. Okay. Johan says, yeah, I never thought it, but I need to write a book. When people then ask me something, I can say, read my book. I tried to answer the question, Johan, before I said read my book. Jeff Gortowski says, can you walk us through the plot? Jeff, what plot are you talking about? Because there's several plots. He says, especially expanding the interest boost and delay phase. I think he's talking about my simulation that I ran. It always gets compressed. Everything is bunched on the left of the plot. Everything is bunched on the left of the plot. Frankie asks, if you're a novice, can I do a level 1? Frankie, the answer is maybe. A level 1 it's a safety program, so it's kind of like driver's ed. Can you do driver's ed as a novice? The answer is yes. But there is some caveats. There's an age limit. You have to be 18 years old in the United States. But there is a program for both the NAR and the Triple-E for people that are younger than that to do a junior certification. But you have to work with an adult in those programs. So on your own, you have to wait until you're 18. But if you're with an adult that is already certified, that has already gone through the safety certification, then you can work with them side by side. You build the rocket, and they are watching you fly it and guiding you along, so you're following the safety code. So yes, you can do it. So if you don't have a high power certification, the biggest motor you can fly is a G80. There are some G motors that require high power certification, but you can't certify for high power on a G motor. You have to certify on an H, even though some G motors do require certification because they're high thrust. Remember when we were talking about the average thrust? Well, the average thrust of 80 newtons is what the National Association of Rocketry says is, I think we don't want to give a Ferrari to a 16-year-old. So it's got a big engine and it's got a lot of power, but it doesn't have a big gas tank. But if you give a lot of power, even in a small tank, you can do some damage. So 80 newtons of average thrust is the biggest that you can fly. So it's a G80. If you wanted to go to a G81, now you've crossed the line. Now you have to have certification. So there are some G motors that require certification. Boggs Family Outdoor says, hello, my rocket friends. Alfred Indy says, we need RockSim backgrounds with snow on the ground for Michigan customers and Colorado customers. Yeah, you could. This image in RockSim. So if I go here and I do flight profile, this image is changeable. You can change it. So you can take a photograph and put it in this background. So to do that, you come down here to Preferences, and there's a background image file. And right now it's set to treefield.png, so that's just a type of graphics. But I could hit Browse, and I could put I got a moonscape here, so I can click on moonscape. And so if I click OK, now I got a moon with stars in the background. So here's my rocket sitting on the moon. But it's just a background image. I could have my face on that background image and fly across my face. The background image is just there for perspective. If you want something that's actual, then you need to use either RockSim Pro or the Launch Visualizer, because then the background is actually the Earth and your specific field. It's based on satellite images of the Earth, but all the satellite images are taken during the summer when all the snow is melted. Except for in those places where there's permanent snow. So if I went and launched in, the North Pole or Antarctica, it would be a white snowfield. Unleashed Venom. Ordered the Zephyr today for my L1 certification in March. Cool. Appreciate all your work, Tim. Thank you, Unleashed Venom, which is Mark Recio. Boggs Family Outdoor says, anyone around Western North Carolina or Eastern Tennessee new to the hobby looking to make some launch friends? So Frankie, no, that's Boggs. What you do is you can go to the Apogee website, and I think if you type in where to launch my rocket, where to launch my rocket. Let's see. No, I do have a page on our website. Maybe it's under About. clubs. Rocket clubs. Nothing showing up. Oh, here it is. Where to launch your model rockets. On this page right here, we have a map, and we tried to put in all the rocket clubs around the country. We don't have too many in the rest of the world, but these are the ones in the United States. The red ones are the National Association of Rocketry, and the blue ones are the Tripoli. So he's looking for something in Western Carolina or Eastern Tennessee. So the closest one would be this one right here, and if you click on it, it tells you the name of the club is Saturn Rocket Club, and it gives you a website, and here's it's not yet published. But if another place to find where the clubs are is the National Association of Rocketry, so nar.org, and once that opens, then you can come down to local clubs, and you can find a club locator. And again, they do pretty much the same thing we did, is they created a map. And here's that rocket club, Saturn Rocketry Club. Let's see if they have better a link. Nope, but they do give you a name and a phone number. So I would call up Kevin Kremer and ask them where they're launching, and that's where I would start. Let me see. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm still waiting for Jeff to tell me which graph. Johan says, "Yeah, I need to send my rocket with boosters and want to see Tim fly it." Okay, Johan, you can do that. Frankie says, "I'm over 18. Jeff Gortowski says, "The plot graph." So Jeff is having problems with the graphs. So we ran this simulation. That was the last one we ran. And so what he's asking about is graphing it. So I'm going to click on the plot graph. And that brings up this screen right here. And right now we're going to plot along the x-axis time. And we have acceleration, altitude, and let's do maybe velocity. So here's velocity. And they're different colors, so acceleration will be green, altitude will be black, and we'll have to set this one to red. And the graph is going to start at time 0, and it's going to end when the data runs out. So let's plot that graph and see what it looks like. So Jeff is saying that all of his stuff is crammed up on one end. Okay, so here's the graph, and this graph, it can be expanded. First, you notice I can click and drag, so I can move it around. A lot of times, if your rocket has a really long duration in the sky, let's say it went really high, so it's taken forever to come down. This stuff over here on this side can be squished together. So there's kind of two ways you can fix it. The first way is use the magnifying glass is down here at the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can see those down here. If you click on that, you can see it's zoomed in. But what happens when it zooms in the whole graph. So it doesn't just zoom horizontally, it zooms vertically as well. So like here, things were cut off at the top. Now I can't see, the things at the bottom. So here's the 0. So 0 altitude is right here. Here's where the rocket takes off. But I can't see how high it goes because it's way up here. So that's one way you can do it. Another way, let me see if I can zoom. I think I can click. Can I do that? If I double click, no, that doesn't help. Yeah, I was thinking that you could drag, but you can't drag. But what you can do is go to the preferences. So most of the action on this rocket happens within like 10 or 11 seconds. I can see that down here because all the stuff is here. So I'm going to go to the preferences. So that just takes me back to this screen. And so right now it says the graphed ending point. So the right side of the screen is going to be ending at the end of the data. But I can change that. I can say, okay, let's change it to the following flight time. So I'm going to change it to the flight time. I'm just going to type in a number over here. And remember that we said that about 11 seconds whereas all the big action happens. So I'm going to change this to 11 seconds and then replot. And so what it did was it expanded it out. So now I can see, where all the action is, even though there's data way out here. I'm just not displaying that data. I'm just displaying up to 11 seconds, so that gives me, I can see things in greater clarity. So I can look at the acceleration and I can see all these little blips going on. And I might ask, well, what's happening with these little blips? And to do that, you need more data. I don't have enough data here. So the first thing I want to look at is maybe the thrust curve of the rocket motor, because acceleration follows thrust. When you push down harder on the accelerator pedal, that's going to increase your acceleration. So let's go back to preferences and let's plot also thrust. And let's make it a different color so that we can tell it apart. And I'll make it that color there and plot the graph. And sure enough, if I look at that thrust curve, look how bumpy it is. And each of those bumps corresponds to a bump in the acceleration. So that is, hopefully, Jeff, hopefully that answers your question. If it's a different question than that, like if it's still getting compressed, I don't know if I can help. It might be something with the graphics card in your computer. Let's see, well, let's find out. And Jeff says, by the way, I am 64 years old today. Woohoo! Happy birthday, Jeff. That is awesome. Happy birthday. Everybody's wishing him happy birthday. That's cool. Sturk03 says, having trouble getting the correct weight into tube fins. Each tube is 5 grams, so 3 of them should be 15, but it will not take it. All right, let's check that out and see what's going on. Let's hope it's not a bug. So let's open up a new design here, because he's kind of talking a smaller rocket. So let's try the Aspire. Do I want to save my changes? No. Okay, so here's a rocket, and this one has regular fins. He's talking tube fins. So what is a tube fin? So go into the rocket design components, and let's come down to the fins. I'm going to delete these just to get them off the rocket. Say delete it, yes. And then I'm going to select this tube right here, and I'm going to add fins back, but this time I'm going to choose tube fins. So down here, there's 4 types of fins. Regular trapezoid or elliptical fins are the regular fins. Custom fins are any other flat shape that you want. A ringtail is a ring around the outside of the rocket, and then a tube fin is tubes strapped around the rocket that act as fins. So I'm going to add tube fins here, and I'm going to cancel out of the database. Let me make this screen bigger so we can see it. Come on, I can't grab it. There we go. Okay, so first we can select the size of the tube. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to choose, this is a 29 millimeter. So I'm going to choose something bigger than that, like a BT60. Click OK. And it added tubes here, and you can tell if I look at the rear view, come down here to rear view, you can see here's my middle tube, and then here's my outer tubes. Okay, so what he's saying, so let me go back to a side view. Let me go to 3D view. So here's the tube fins, and you can see right now they're at the front of the tube that we attached it to. See when I move my cursor up and down that it changes? That means I can expand this view screen right here to change it so I can make it bigger. Okay, so right now RockSim is calculating the mass of the fin at 6.13 grams, and there's 3 tubes, so 6 times 3 is 18. So mine is calculating correctly. So it means that I don't know what's going on with your design. Sturco 3. Each tube fin is 5 grams, so 3 of them should be 15, but it will not take. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Let's change this to 4 fins. Maximize the tube count. I go 5, so 6 times 5 is 30 grams. So that's the set, that's the single one. I'm at a loss. So now I have 5 tube fins around. And then if I want to change the location, I can slide them down to the rear of the rocket. Let me go to 2D so I can place them better. Let's go make it measured from the base of the part and make it 0, and that will make it exactly at the end of the tube. Hit the tab key, and so now I have my tubes down there at the bottom. Mark says pronounce Risho. Oh, okay. So Unleash Venom is Mark Risho. Thank you for doing that. I hate to butcher somebody's name. Jeff Kordowski says, that is it. I must have answered his question. Julie Kaufman, in RockSim, how to replace launch lugs with universal rail guides. Okay, that's a good question, Julie. Okay, so here we have a launch lug, and if we go to the components over here, you see launch lug right here. I can add a launch lug. Let me click on this tube so that these aren't grayed out. I can add a launch lug, but you'll notice there's nothing that says rail guide or rail button. It's because the geometry of those things is so hard to draw. RockSim likes simple shapes like nose cones. You know, when I'm in 3D, it likes simple shapes like tubes. We can draw a tube because a tube is easy to draw because it's just a circle that's been extruded. A nose cone, it has a mathematical shape that's easy to calculate. So most of our components are easy to draw, but rail buttons and rail guides are not easy to draw, so we don't have them listed here. But if you were to put one on your rocket, I would just assume it's a launch lug because a rail guide's going to be, depending on the size of the launch lug, it's either going to be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So the drag is possibly going to be in that same neighborhood. A long time ago, I did a report on the drag of launch lugs. Let's see if I can still find it. So how-to and guides, and I think it's under rocketry and technical information, and then I think it was an R&D project. Oh, here it is, the drag of launch lugs. So yeah, so that's how I got there. I went to R&D projects from the NAR. That was under the, not the shopping menu, but under how-to and guides. And then you go down to rocketry technical info, and then down over here are R&D projects from the NAR. So that's how I got to that page. And then it's a big file, so it's 26 megabytes. Let's see if I can download it and see what happens. It's downloading pretty quick. Let me take a sip of water. All right, so There's no table of contents, Tim. So here's a launch lug. This is how I did the report. I set up a computational fluid dynamics. This is what the program looked like, and this program no longer exists, and I'm so mad because I could never reproduce this again. But at the time, it was just awesome, and it was simple to use. And so I just created a rocket, and I just changed what kind of rail guide was on there. So sometimes it was a launch lug, sometimes it was a rail guide, sometimes it was a rail button. And then I changed it to various types of things. So here I started out with a launch lug. Then I shortened the length of the lug, and I increased the length of the lug. And then I made it a ring. So if you took a piece of wire or like a ring, took a piece of wire and then just strapped it to the side of your rocket. And I've seen people do this, particularly on scale models, where they don't want a launch lug showing because they're ugly. So they put a little ring here made out of like a paper clip and a little ring down here. And they're kind of almost invisible, but it's still, you could put it on a launch rod. So that's why I had the ring. Rings, it turns out, are really draggy. You don't want to put a ring on. Here's a launch button. Here's an airfoiled button. Here's a launch guide. So this is what Julie is talking about. So here is the standard universal launch guide. And then there's a rail guide. This one has a slot in the middle. This one doesn't. When we injection mold them at Apogee, let me see if I can go to the Apogee site again. I'll show you exactly what it looks like. Universal rail guides. So here is what they look like. This is not the latest version, but it's close. The reason I can tell it's not the latest version is see how it's rounded here on the front edges. On our new ones, they're injection molded, and so they're not rounded. They're nice, and every line is crisp and perfect. But we had to injection mold these things. You don't want to have thick plastic because what they call it is sink, where the plastic, when it cools, where the plastic is thick, it takes longer to cool than everything around it. So everything around it cools really fast, but the stuff in the middle takes longer to cool, so it kind of shrinks, and it's called sink. And so then you get a line. So in order to prevent sink, you want everything to have a uniform thickness. And so instead of being really thick, I can make it thin here to match the thickness here, so that to minimize shrink. It turns out, I'll get down to the end here and I can do a comparison. So then, so what happens if you take your knife and you deburr it, and so you end up with a sharp edge that way, or you could take sandpaper and sand it on the outside. This another airfoil button. I think this one has rounded edges on it. Like these edges were rounded, so you could take sandpaper and round them off. Here's a launch lug that you angled. So the wind is coming from this way and it's angled backwards. Then you can angle the back end. Then you can angle both ends. And then you can angle it like this. And it turns out that angling it this way is the better way for reducing drag than doing it this way. So this launch lug down here has lower drag than that one. And there's a final chart at the very end that you can compare the CDs. So if you were comparing a launch lug, a 1/4 inch launch lug, the CD is 0.50, and a universal rail guide, the drag is 0.27. So what you would do in RockSim, knowing that this has, I think this is a 1/4 inch launch lug right here. Outside diameter, inside diameter is 0.28. So 1/4 inch is 0.25. So this launch lug right here would slide onto a 1/4 inch launch rod. And so because I know that the drag is going to be less with using a universal rail guide, you still have to use a launch lug, but I would just make it smaller so that the drag is smaller. So let me go back to that report. Where'd that report go? So look at this. So a universal rail guide is 0.27, so that's in column number 14. A regular 1 inch launch Avion with a launch lug is 0.38. So even 1/8 of an inch launch lug has more drag, is producing more drag than a universal rail guide. But I would start there. Instead of using a 1/4 inch launch lug, use an 1/8 inch, and that'll get you into the ballpark. So that's how I would handle putting a universal rail guide on in RockSim. And then what you'd have to do, a universal rail guide does weigh a little bit more. So the mass of a universal rail guide is 1.9 grams. So then you'd have to add, that's in RockSim Pro. Let me get rid of that since we're not using RockSim Pro today. Click OK here. Or let me double check on that launch lug. Remember we said it was 1.9 grams. This part right here is 1.3 grams. So even a 1/4 inch weighs less than a universal rail guide. So you would have to add a mass object. So I'd throw a mass object right in the center of that rail or launch lug, but it's going to be in the tube. So it's in the same spot. We talked about this last week when we were talking about mass objects. So hopefully, Julie, that was kind of a long-winded answer. It was a really good question. Long-winded answer, though. And boy, we've gone long. We're after 3 o'clock already. So let me just quickly go through the last of these comments. Chris's Rocketry and More says, will you show how to fix that in RockSim? Thank you. What is he talking about? Chris says, the data in RockSim and the data on your website does not match for the Aerotech G80. Okay. I don't have enough time to talk about that one right now, Chris, but there is a video on it that we did talk about previously. So remind me next week. I am not going to be here. Michelle will be here, but Michelle knows how to do it. But if you go to the software and the RockSim live training, we're looking for, here it is right here, episode number 107, how to edit existing motor files. And I talk about it, and again, unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of time to talk about it. So that's why we can talk about it in the future, but this will give you a starting point until next week. And also in RockSim, there's 2 G80s. Aerotech had 2 G80s. They had their original one, and then they redesigned it. And for a while there, they were both out there in the world, so we had 2 G80s in RockSim. I think they've since discontinued one of them. Alfred Indy says, do you have any electronics for level 1? I thought you had just had to. Oh, he's asking, do you have to have electronics for a level 1? And the answer is no, you do not need electronics for a level 1, nor do you need it for a level 2. A lot of people use it because they don't want to walk, but you don't need it. In fact, I recommend for both level 1 and level 2 that you do not use any electronics. And the reason is it adds complexity. And while you're going through that safety training certification process, you don't need any extra complexity. Just get certified, and on the very next flight, then you can add the complexity of doing electronics. So you don't need to use electronics. I recommend that you don't until you get certified. Or if you do electronics, do it on another rocket. You can do the Katana Junior we created specifically to allow people to test dual deployment, test electronics without using high power motors. So if you want to play with it and learn how to do it, the Katana Junior. Again, go to the Apogee website and just type in the search bar, Katana Junior. There's two versions of the Katana Junior and the Katana. Again, one is small, one is big. Nope, don't have a picture of it. But this is what it looks like. This is Martin. He's our product developer here at Apogee. He's setting it up. And we flew it, dual deployment. See, here's the Katana Junior. It's big enough where you can test electronics, but it doesn't require expensive motors. Frankie Russo asks, what would be a good beginner rocket for someone that wants to transition into level 1? We talked about it, is the Zephyr. Not the Zephyr Junior, but the big Zephyr. That's our level 1 rocket. So that's the one that we recommend to people that want to get into level 1. You can fly it on a G motor that's under a G80, so it doesn't require certification to fly it. You can build it and fly it, and then afterwards you can certify on it. So if I go Zephyr, here's the Zephyr. And if you go down here to the recommended motors, you can see there are some motors that you can fly it on. So we have a G, let me sort it by motors. This is a sortable chart. So if I just click on the column, now I resorted it. So all the G motors at the bottom. So a G46, G50, G58, G60, G61, G67, G69, G78, G79. You should be able to fly it on a G80 as well. I don't know why the G80 is not listed here. But to G115 that we talked about earlier is greater than a G80. So this one is restricted, and it requires a level 1 certification right there. This one right here, this little L1 star, the star means that it's a special motor that requires level 1. And the reason is because it's a propellant type. This is a skid mark rocket motors. We kind of talked about this earlier with the propellant formulation, but this one is particular in that it creates a flame that shoots up sparks like a sparkler. And these sparks, unfortunately, can cause fires, and that's a safety issue. And we want you to be safe, so to fly that motor, you have to be certified. So that's why it's a restricted motor. Okay, and then we got more questions. A lot of questions today. How the booster pods add 2 motors. And that was by Maximo Delgado. We don't have time to talk about that again, but we have talked about it before in the RockSim Live. So if you go to the RockSim Live page, go to How-To and Guides, Software, RockSim Live Training, and if you type in booster pods, I don't want to do it here. I want to do a search on the page. To do a search specific on this page only, do a Control F for find, and it brings up this search bar up here, and this will only search on this page. So we're going to talk about booster pods. Okay, so here's booster pods that we talked about. And we talked about it 4 times apparently. So there's 1, 2, 3, episode number 66. So you click on that, And we also talked about it in episode 25. So there's a little bit of information, but if you come back next week, we can do it live in process right here. I'm just saying go here for right now because I'm way over time already. Jeff Gorkowski says, gotta run. I think I'll use my discount on a slow-mo. Jeff Gorkowski says, bye all. Sturk says, I figured out the tube fin problem. I had the OD-ID causing a much bigger mass than 5 grams. Okay, so good. He figured it out. Sturk03 says, where is the shock cord menu? In RockSim, I'll do that real quick. So let me cancel out of here. Save my changes, no. Okay, so if I wanted to add a shock cord, it's under the mass object. So if you come over here, if I add a new mass object, I can usually add a mass object a lot of different places. Click on mass object, and right now it's looking in the database. Cancel out of the database, and then right here where it says the classification general, choose shock cord. And when you do that, now here the material is the database. So then I can select from the database of shock cords. And you can, 1/32 inch Kevlar, and then you adjust the length and you change the location, and now you have your shock cord, but it's represented by the M, which is the mass object. Okay, so a lot of questions today. Thank you all. Where's my mouse? There we go. Thank you all for coming. Again, next week, which is, I think, March 3, Michelle will be here. I'll be flying rockets. I'm going to go down to Arizona for a rocket contest called the Arizona Cup. It's in Tucson. So if you're in Tucson, there is a rocket launch going on. Say hello. I'll be there Friday, Saturday, and I leave Sunday coming back here so that I'm back to work on Monday. So thank you everybody for coming. We will be here. Michelle will do it. She's really great at it. She knows it pretty much as good as I do. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go out and launch.